protecting culture and so on and so forth. Given that, Honorable Speaker, the cultural expressions and artifacts are very, very expensive mementos that can fetch very high prices elsewhere when removed from where they are. I talk about this as I look at where I come from, the strong culture of the Abasiekwe community, who are the only rainmakers in this country, and whom in 1963, when it was over-raining in Nairobi and we wanted to get independence, they were invited to come and stop the rains. And now if somebody interferes with them and then is only being fined 200,000 or an imprisonment of 2 years, that is too little. That's the Abasiekwe community, which still continues to make rains. And they have a number of issues about what we need to do, and this law should have provided that base to protect their culture so that it's not exuded by other people. It also reminds me of the Tiriki in Vihiga, who have a very strong cultural base. They have their forests and expressions, landscapes, which they use for circumcision. I think they'll be circumcising this year. And they really need to be protected. So when we casualize the punishments, then this is something we shall discuss and make amendments. But more importantly, Honorable Speaker, is what the earlier speaker spoke to, because the bill seems to leave out certain areas of culture, which I'll call cultural patrimony. In cultural patrimony, you now go beyond the artifacts themselves and deal with cultural expressions and the nature of the culture itself. The law does not seem to go to that extent. It is identifying items and dealing with items of culture. But you know, culture includes even archaeological sites. So how are we going to deal with archaeological sites that are actually the mother of culture and the other cultural expressions that are supposed to be protected? There has been an attempt, Honorable Speaker, to protect culture using the international law. And this bill tries to actualize some of those conventions that try to protect culture internationally, which is very good. And one of such conventions has been the Hague Convention in its Article 1, which has tried to protect the cultural property and landscapes even during war. But then our bill must encompass the broadness of culture beyond the artifacts and the physical things that can be seen or carried from one place to another. Of course, not forgetting that what this parliament has always done, and which is wrong, and seems to happen again, is we get tired when we are making the law and indicate that the cabinet secretary shall make certain items or certain comments or certain laws which otherwise is not his business to do. And this bill has also gone that direction, and therefore for the third reading we need to go into the details and make sure that we make a complete law, even if it's not be full, because culture is very broad, but it's a law that will be a beginning to protect our cultural practices moving forward. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
I have the mic. Thank you very much. The Honorable Adan Kainan, member for Aldas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This culture bill introduced by the Leader of Majority seeks to promote, preserve, and institutionalize Kenya's rich and diverse cultural heritage, Madam Speaker. At the core of the bill proposes the establishment of National Cultural Heritage Council, a specialized body tasked with the management, promotion, and protection of Kenya's cultural heritage sites, indigenous practices, and artistic expression. The council's work is to preserve, is to create a culture of continuity and harnessing the promotion of our rich cultural heritage. Madam Speaker, this bill also attempts to create some sort of cultural preservation and revitalization. Kenya, Madam Speaker, is home to over 40 ethnic communities with distinct traditions, languages, artistic expression. And therefore, this bill is timely because it attempts to safeguard the endangered languages like the Ogiek, the super language of my good friend, the Honorable Mili, and also attempts to protect sacred sites like the Kaya forest of the Mijikenda, and preserve traditional craftsmanship such as the Maasai beadwork and the Lamu Swahili architecture. Madam Speaker, if you look at the face of Kenya, and you look at Mili and Mili Odhiambo and her language, the super language, and I'm sure they have been consumed by the rich Luo culture, they are still struggling, and therefore we need to create a special place for them so that even after the next generations, the super community is still remembered. Madam Speaker, this bill also will boost tourism and economic growth. Cultural heritage is a key driver of heritage tourism, Madam Speaker, which contributes significantly to Kenya's economy. Therefore, by promoting cultural festivals such as the Lake Turkana Cultural Festival, the Lamu Swahili Cultural Festival, and other, e.g. like the Lake Turkana Cultural Festival, Lamu Cultural Festival, and historical landmarks such as Fort Jesus, the Great Rift Valley prehistorical sites, the bill positions Kenya as a premier cultural tourism destination, Madam Speaker. And therefore, this in turn is expected to create job opportunities, support local artisans, and attract international investment. Madam Speaker, this bill, once passed, will also contribute to the strengthening of our national identity and unity. Madam Speaker, Kenya is a diverse nation. I always say that Kenya is a collection of many nation states. The rich historical, cultural heritage of these communities must be documented, contextualized, put into a form that can easily be used by the current generation and the future generation, Madam Speaker. And therefore, this cultural heritage, Madam Speaker, plays a fundamental role in our national identity and cohesion. And this is what this country requires. Madam Speaker, when the colonialists brought us together with our diverse cultural heritage, we attempted to get a Kenyan culture. A Kenyan culture in the form of one language, one heritage, one identity, and we're still struggling. And therefore today, if you ask me, that is one thing that we should prioritize as leadership so that we have the Kenyan culture, the Kenyan identity, the Kenyan dress, the Kenyan way of thinking, the Kenyan way of doing things, so that that becomes the unique Kenyan identification. And therefore, I hope this bill, once passed, Madam Speaker, will accelerate our shared history and indigenous knowledge system, Madam Speaker. And therefore, again, once that is done, once that is done, we'll see, as the bill aims to instill patriotism, encourage cultural pride, and bridge ethnic divides, ultimately reinforcing the sense of being a Kenyan, Madam Speaker. And this is one thing that has been lacking. Madam Speaker, over the years, we have prided ourselves. And this is one thing that really affects our national unity. Kenyans are known for their resilience. Kenyans are known for their focus. Kenyans are known for their rich cultural heritage. But Madam Speaker, what we have lacked is a law that will help us coalesce around that identity and project and promote and protect that Kenyan identity that will demonstrate the uniqueness of the Kenyan culture, not only locally, but also internationally, thus earning Kenya being a unique tourist destination, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, countries like Turkey, I wish you had that. Countries like Turkey, countries like United Arab Emirates, countries like Japan benefit from tourism. And yet they lack so many other natural resources, Madam Speaker. Can we be in the league of the same nation, Madam Speaker, once we identify and maximize on this critical national heritage, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, over the years also, there has been an attempt, because of this lack of identity, to profile, to stigmatize, and to divide the Kenyan society along regional lines, along regionalism, along tribal lines, Madam Speaker, along negative ethnicity, Madam Speaker. And this has discouraged, Madam Speaker, our identity as one united, sovereign state called Kenya, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, immediately after independence, we attempted to promote English at the expense of Kiswahili, Madam Speaker, which is a local, our own indigenous language, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's the high time that we also identify English is very good. It's the language of the white-collar job seekers. But equally, Madam Speaker, we also need to promote Kiswahili, so that the Kenyan communities, Kiswahili is a collection of many languages: the Arabic language, the Turkish language, the Portuguese language, the Bantu language, and many other languages, Madam Speaker. And therefore, at times when we interact with our colleagues from the East African community, in particular the Tanzanians, we are lost. Which is the most refined Kiswahili? Is it the Kenyan Kiswahili, or the Tanzanian Kiswahili, or the East African Kiswahili, or the Central African Kiswahili, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, it's because of this that once this bill is passed, we hope and pray that some of these things will be collected, put together, and give us a clear identity. Madam Speaker, on the face of it, there are clear gaps in this particular bill, which must also be addressed. Madam Speaker, we currently have the National Museum of Kenya, we have the Kenya National Archive, and we have the Kenya Film Corporation. Madam Speaker, the role of these organizations must also be clearly acknowledged in order to avoid any perceived jurisdictional conflict, Madam Speaker. Because it is very easy to legislate this, and yet tomorrow National Museum will come and say, this bill encroaches on their mandate. The National Archive will come and say, this bill encroaches on their mandate. The Kenya Film Commission will also say, this bill encroaches on their mandate. Madam Speaker, in the third reading, we must look at this, and I'm sure with the proper legal minds, this can also be addressed, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this also requires, once this bill is passed, there is need to build capacity. Because we have many professionals, academic professionals. We need to have specialized people to deal with our culture, to deal with this particular, the implementation of this particular bill, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have passed many laws. Many laws. Madam Speaker, at times enforcement becomes a problem. We pass laws, and this country is known. Madam Speaker, in 1999, I had the privilege, and allow me to say this, I had the privilege of being a member of the Finance Bill, and Finance Committee, the Finance Committee, and we went to Malaysia.
I'll give 2 minutes. I'll give you two. I'll give you 2 for your 5 terms in this house. So 2 minutes.
Passing bills is one thing.
The next mic.
When we went to Malaysia in the name of benchmarking, Madam Speaker, we were told, we were with the late Honorable Muchuki and many others, we were told, we went around, we were welcomed by the Deputy Speaker, by the clerk, and finally we asked for a document that we will use to improve the facilities in Nairobi and many other urban centers. Shockingly, the clerk went to their archive, their library, and gave us a document that they borrowed from Kenya in 1974. And we were told to use the same document for benchmarking. I will not be surprised that this bill and many other bills similar bills are in our archives. So what I'm trying to say, it's very easy to pass this bill. Are we ready to implement? Are we ready to domesticate this? Are we ready to enforce this? And this is one thing that we have been lacking. Very good in theories, very good in legislations, but when it comes to implementation, we are not very good. And therefore, this is a good bill, and I hope and pray that once we go through the third reading, we'll have a bill that meets the test of time. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Before you, Honorable Johanna Ngeno, I want to give an opportunity to the minority whip. So the Honorable Millie Odhiambo, please. Then we'll have Honorable Johanna Ngeno.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for indulging me, Madam Speaker, because as I'd requested, you know, we are having a current meeting with the different departments on the budget policy statements. I have to run back. Madam Speaker, I wish to say that I support this bill. And Madam Speaker, there is definitely need for cultural preservation. And Madam Speaker, because culture is what shows our identity as a people. And people who don't have their culture or don't preserve their culture are a lost people because they don't know who they are. Madam Speaker, because I don't want to adversely mention a friendly country, of late I've been to many countries. And I can tell you there's one country that has built completely, you know, they brought a city anew. And if you actually look at that city, there's something that is lacking. It lacks a spirit because it lacks the culture. That they have done so much in the last 5 or so years to modernize it. But because the modernized aspect doesn't show you where they're coming from, the city feels empty. It doesn't have a spirit because it doesn't show what the people were like. And so, Madam Speaker, if you look at, for instance, somewhere like Marrakesh in Morocco, it shows where they're coming from. It's so beautiful, it shows the culture. But culture is not just manifest in the physical, but I like this bill because it just shows also that it is also in very different aspects, including language. And as a person who is a cultural minority, I know what that means. Madam Speaker, I am born a Suba. My father is a Suba. And I have seen in my generation how that has actually transformed over the years. Where up to my grandfather has a Luo name and a Suba name. All the people ahead of him have very Suba Bantu names. All of us are from my grandfather down, now only have Luo names. And we have lost the Suba names. Madam Speaker, fortunately, the language has been restored. So the Suba now speak Suba, but not all Suba speak Lusuba. But for a fact, we have almost lost all the culture in relation to Suba, except a few. And I want to thank the organizations that have been doing cultural events that seek to sustain what is a little that is remaining of the Suba people as a people. And Madam Speaker, I am actually a very proud Suba, even though I can tell you I'm both Suba and Luo because my mother is Luo. And I love that we preserve both the Luo culture and the Suba culture. Madam Speaker, one of the issues that I'd want to also indicate, which I've seen this bill commenting on, but we need to strengthen, is the issue of intellectual property rights on our culture. That there are so many people that have been appropriating our cultural issues. Give example of even our cultural dressing, Madam Speaker. And they go and sell it at a song. Yet it is actually who we are. And in the US now, it's a very big issue called cultural appropriation. That when you see people doing or saying things that is not there, people are saying, I don't want to culturally appropriate. And in the same manner, we need to use those same terminology that we actually criminalize cultural appropriation, or find a way, even if we don't criminalize it, to make sure that we preserve our culture and the things that are very important to us that other people may wish to appropriate. There must be a way in which they pay back to our societies for using that. Madam Speaker, I can tell you for a fact when I go outside, I wear this band on my head. And in Kenya, people just say, oh, Millie, we actually see you like it's an insignia, it's what shows who you are. But in a lot of communities in Kenya, we actually have this. It's just at a modernized mind. In the Luo culture, if you see me doing the beaded one, It is called Ligisa. And Ligisa is worn by women in leadership. So if you see me wearing that, it basically says, in my culture, it shows that I'm a woman leader. But for now, because we don't actually take it seriously, when people see me, think it's just an issue, a statement of fashion. Yes, it's fashionable, but it's also cultural. And it is not just amongst the Luo community, it's amongst very many communities, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we must also see how we link culture with the tourism. I want to thank the Parliament that they recently organized a very good training, and the training was on PPP, public-private partnerships. And Madam Speaker, one of the things that I actually picked up from that is the immense potential of linking tourism and culture. And Madam Speaker, I recently, together with my husband, we've recently visited a place called Nido in the Philippines. And Madam Speaker, we pay quite a bit of money to do things which you could do here in Kenya very easily. Things like cultural immersion and doing things that have to do with our culture. Visiting a spiritual center like Atego Island in my constituency, visiting the two bird islands in my constituency, or the cultural caves in Fagano Island, amongst others. We have a lot that we get from our culture that we can use to, encourage tourism. Madam Speaker, however, I just want to say that I have a rider in relation to this bill that we must strengthen, which is the issue of harmful cultural practices. The Constitution outlaws harmful cultural practices, and I would want us to strengthen the sections of this bill that deals with harmful cultural practices, and say that even though we actually allow cultural practices, there are certain cultural practices that are harmful, such as female genital mutilation, beading, forced wife inheritance, early and forced marriage of young girls. And Madam Speaker, you find there are people, when you go to communities, they want to justify for you. Before I came here, I used to represent a lot of young girls and women in court. And I remember one time when we were in Kajiado court, and the Children Act had just already passed. And we arrested some old man who had married a 10-year-old girl. And when we went there, he said, no, but this is allowed in my culture. And then when we told him, no, we cannot allow you, it's no longer allowed in law, then he said, did Honorable Saitoti know that you passed such a law? Because he thought then Honorable Saitoti should have stopped us from passing a law stopping him from marrying a 10-year-old girl. So because of that, Madam Speaker, we must put a rider that even though we have culture, there are certain cultural practices that are retrogressive. But also, Madam Speaker, one of the things that I want us to do is to enhance the historical bit where we have now distorted culture. And Madam Speaker, if you actually look at our historical issues, you discover, for instance, amongst the Luo community, women were really respected and exalted. But now people are actually doing the reverse. If you look at the bigger clans in Luo, they start with their female name. It's almost like the House of Mumbi. We start with the Kanyamwa, Kanyadoto, Kanyekela, Kanya something. They are all about women. But now we are being told women cannot lead. Who told you women cannot lead? We are in charge of clans. So if you are in charge of clans, why can we then not lead? We must put our history correctly, and our history respected and exalted women. And I want to say that I'm very happy the House of Mumbi has actually kept that. And so we know that's why you see a lot of women in Kikuyu land get elected, because they preserved that history. But in some of our areas, we are losing that. And so we have people creating their own stories about what was there in culture. Madam Speaker, I support, and I look at it more keenly so that I see if there are areas, the areas that I've spoken, if they are not well covered, that will bring amendment. I support. Thank you.
Thank you. The Honorable Johanna Ngeno.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also wish to make a small contribution of this matter before this House, especially something that touches on our cultures. You know, Madam Speaker, when we speak about culture, it means so many things to most of us, especially those of us who were brought up in a very serious cultural background. Madam Speaker, when I grew up, a friend of mine who was a teacher used to tell me that an uncultured person is an uncivilized person. To the extent that in most of the cases, people used to believe that when you follow your culture, it's like you are primitive. It's like you're doing backward things. But Madam Speaker, as time went by, we realized that even what the colonial governments and the white people brought us here in Africa was their culture. So that when you even compare the biblical writings, you compare with what our people used to believe in, there is no difference. It's only that ours was not in written form. Only that, but we used to pray to the same God. We believe in the same God. It's only the names are different. But what we were calling our God is the same God that the Bible teaches us. The cultures that we had, the way we prayed and how we behaved, the way we circumcised our boys, and all that, Madam Speaker, is an indication that our culture was just thrown out because somebody else wanted us to adopt their culture so that we forget about ours. Madam Speaker, culture defines who we are. It's our background, and it is something that we must live with, Madam Speaker, so that we must find ways of promoting our culture so that it can be inherited from generations to generations. Culture, Madam Speaker, is the heartbeat of humanity. It is actually how most of us were brought up. And if you were to ask everybody, they were brought up in a certain culture. Even if it is those who were brought up in Nairobi, still they will go back to their cultures. They will be taught on how their people used to behave, the kind of clothing people used to have, etc., etc. So therefore, Madam Speaker, I wish to support this particular bill that touches on how to protect the cultural artifacts, the identity of our nation and our people. And of course, Madam Speaker, to look into what exactly do we need to do so that our culture is not lost. Madam Speaker, first we talk about the artifacts. Artifacts, Madam Speaker, are tools which were used by our people. And each and every people, each and every community has their own ways or their own means or their own artifacts. Madam Speaker, and this one ranges from clothing to the kind of artifacts they used to use, whether when they were going to pray or their praying sites, or what they use also to appease the enemies, or what they used to, when they want to appease their gods, when they want to give blessings, when they want to do their traditional circumcisions, even when the elders were having their drinks and like the current kind of drinking. Madam Speaker, those are cultural artifacts that we must protect by all means. Madam Speaker, I remember at the beginning of Kibaki government, I think it was around 2003-04, the people from the Kalenjin community who had lost a very great warrior and an overseer and a Laibon called Koitalel Samoe, disputed and petitioned the government to ensure that they return the artifacts which had been looted by the colonial government at that time and took them away to their country. And at that time, Madam Speaker, the president of that time helped that community to bring back their artifacts, only that they did not surrender the skull or the head of the Laibon. Madam Speaker, those artifacts have a very serious meaning to the communities where that Laibon came from. And that is why it was very important that they bring back those particular artifacts. Madam Speaker, even in many other areas, many other communities, even the sub-tribes where we come from, there are artifacts which were confiscated, like the stools, the three-legged stools, which were used for prayers and were used also for blessings, and which were confiscated by the Europeans. Madam Speaker, there are those ones that remained, there are those ones that we still have in our homes. And this law, Madam Speaker, protects the misuse and the looting and the stealing of these particular artifacts which can help, or which were used as our traditional memories for traditional use. Madam Speaker, when we talk about culture also touches on the cultural clothing. Every community, Madam Speaker, in this country have their own traditional clothing, their own cultural clothings. And Madam Speaker, I would wish also one day in this house, Madam Speaker, we introduce a cultural day where every member, because at least we all come from particular backgrounds, particular communities, so that we can say this is a cultural day where every member of this house will wear their cultural clothing, so that we dress the way our communities used to dress. And you will be shocked, Madam Speaker, because we have our dresses, cultural dresses that fits us so well, and they are so good, so that when you see our ladies, if they were to put on those particular clothings and dresses, Madam Speaker, you'll be shocked at how beautiful they look. And even men, when they put on those particular dresses, clothes, Madam Speaker, you will imagine how also men handsomely look, apart from the ones we wear in Parliament. Like when we put on, Madam Speaker.
I know the Honorable Irene Mayaka is next in my list, but I think you are saying you have a point of order, Honorable Irene Mayaka? Yes. Please proceed. What is out of order?
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, the Honorable Member is out of order because he's telling us that we only look beautiful when we wear cultural clothes. What does he mean? What is he insinuating? Is he trying to say that right now we don't look beautiful? He needs to withdraw.
Madam Speaker,
I thought we could address the first point of order. Honorable
yes,
Member for Emukuru, what do you have to say about that?
And I will address Mheshimiwa Milli's also point of order. I know what she is.
No. You cannot address a point of order when you have not heard it.
I will, Madam Speaker, I just want to say that, you know, when you look, I said our women, our ladies will look even more beautiful when they dress in their traditional dress. Just like our men will look more handsome when they dress in our cultural dresses. So, Madam Speaker, what I meant is, we are beautiful.
Chairman, order.
Our ladies are beautiful.
Order. We have another point of order by the Honorable Millie Odhiambo. Please take your seat. What is out of order, Honorable Millie Odhiambo?
Madam Speaker, thank you for giving me the opportunity. Madam Speaker, I'm just worried that the member seems to suggest that we should be coming to Parliament dressed, naked with just a small thing underneath. Because culturally, that's how we dressed. We were naked with something underneath. Madam Speaker, is that really in order? Is that what we are implying? Our culture, we were half naked, Madam Speaker. The world is evolving, and that is part of culture. So are you suggesting that members should be coming to the house naked?
Madam Speaker, we should be proud of our culture. And it doesn't matter how that culture looked like. Whether we used to put on. And after all, Madam Speaker, when you look at the kinds of dressing that we have today, our ladies are almost naked. And yet, that is not even our cultural dress. So what I meant, Madam Speaker, is that we would, let us be proud of where we are, where we came from, who we are. And that starts from our artifacts, to our dress, to our food, to the food that we eat, to the sites that we normally visit. Because, Madam Speaker, even the cultural sites that we visit will look more, even healing, than the sites that we visit, like even the National Assembly. Madam Speaker, we normally had places that we will go for cultural prayers, and they look so soothing than even any other place. So what I meant, Madam Speaker, is that our ladies are beautiful, but they will be more beautiful if they were to put on.
Well, you've done very well to defend yourself. The Honorable Irene Mayaka, and thank you for your patience, Irene.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I also want to support this particular bill which I think is very well placed before the House. And Honorable Speaker, this is a bill that actually gives meat to bone to Article 11 of the Constitution, because that already speaks about protecting, promoting, and defending our culture, but it doesn't give us the structure and the how to do that in a manner that actually ensures that all the cultures within our country are actually protected. Madam Speaker, the fact that as a nation we have a variety of cultures is actually a very good thing, because we are able to showcase the different aspects of who the people of Kenya are. And Honorable Speaker, just as a few members have already said, is that most of us who are city-born children, who have not had the opportunity to interact with our culture, we don't really understand, unless you had parents like mine who ensured that you knew about the traditional dances of Abagusi, the traditional liquor of Abagusi, and various other traditions. You will not be able to really interact with that. Honorable Speaker, and also, this is actually a very good coincidence, because I know you skipped statements, but my statements was actually alluding to an aspect of protecting some of the cultural sites that the people of Abagusi and especially Nyamira County has. For example, Honorable Speaker, we have a place in Manga Hills that is called the Engoroya Manga, where it has been said that when you drop something in that particular hole, it goes all the way to Lake Victoria. And that is one of the sites that has been beholden by our people. We have cultural stones there that actually look like a person. We have cultural huts there that people actually go there and pray. And actually, Honorable Speaker, when people go to visit Manga Hills and those specific places, like the men dress in suits out of respect for those sites. And what they do there is that they go, they pray for the community, they pray for their families. And these are some of the things that I'm actually seeking to protect and to ensure that it is preserved so that even our children get to learn about it. Honorable Speaker, the other thing that I really like is that the bill even speaks about our language. Because most of the people, most of our children now, because they are born from families of different communities, they're not able to speak our languages. And also because of school again. Unless you deliberately, as a parent, go out of your way to teach your children their languages, their ethnic languages, they do not even speak it. And those are some of the things that we need to reserve. Honorable Speaker, I just want to speak about some of the clauses that for me really stood out. Like, for example, clause 9 that speaks of establishing royalties. That is very important because we do not want these cultures to fade away. We do not want, for example, the Maasai shuka to fade away because it has not been protected by royalties. We do not want the sisal skirt that the Luos use to dance their traditional dances to fade away because it is not protected. Or even, Honorable Speaker, our traditional alcohol, ebusa. I know different communities call this by different names, but we do not want that to also disappear as well. Clause 10 speaks about compensation of people's culture. And on this particular one, I'm very interested and very keen on it. Because, for example, if you go to a wedding and people dance our obokano from the Gusi community, I'd like to see a situation where royalties are actually paid back to the community. Or the ribina dance, that for us, we use that dance when we are inviting rains to come to our community. Honorable Speaker, the other clause is clause 11, that speaks about exports and imports of products. Again, very interesting, and I'm very biased in terms of giving examples from my community, the Abagusi community, because we are famously known for the soapstone culture and different items that are made out of the soapstone. But this is something that has slowly disappeared. We are seeing a situation where it is now individuals who are doing the exports on their own, instead of actually having it being like a community thing that is being done, so that people out there know that when you get a salt shaker or a tot glass or a mug for drinking tea that is made out of soapstone, you know that this has come from the Gusi community. And if you can have a way of even ensuring that this is even engraved and the royalties are protected, then that will be a fantastic thing. The other clause, Honorable Speaker, is clause 18 that speaks of promotion of culture. And Honorable Speaker, this particular one, I just want to connect it with the Utamaduni Day. Because yes, we have Utamaduni Day, we have the national celebration, but for me, this is a celebration that should actually be devolved down to different communities. So that on this day nationally, we know that as the people of Kenya, we are all celebrating our specific culture. I also like the fact that we want to have cultural centers that mushroom out of having this particular bill in place, so that if you come to Nyamira County, or you go to Baringo, or you go to Kirinyaga, or you go to Samburu, there's a place where you can actually go and see that this is where people have managed to it's like a museum where you can be able to see different artifacts. In Nyamira, for example, Honorable Speaker, we have a restaurant that the owner of that restaurant has actually set aside one area where you can go into our traditional huts, you can see how the busa was being made, you can have an opportunity to eat our traditional vegetables, chinsaga, managu. You can be able to eat our traditional ugali. You can be able to see the setup of the Gusii families and how where the eldest son would stay in the homestead, and the younger sons and the wife and all that. But having said that, Honorable Speaker, about all the beauties of our culture that we can actually defend, for me, the one thing that I also want us to be very careful is the promotion of the retrogressive culture. And this, we need to check the bill and confirm, which we will do, so that if there's any particular place that does not categorically speak about the retrogressive culture, then we can set that aside. Retrogressive in the sense of, for example, for us, the FGM practice. That is definitely not a culture that we would want to promote. So we have to be very careful to ensure that these cultures that are very retrogressive are not encouraged. Honorable Speaker, having said that, and so that I also save time for the other members, is that, yes, I really want us to celebrate this bill, but also I do not want this to be one of those bills that is just put on the shelf somewhere after its assent. My wish is that, and I know the majority party represented by Honorable Naomi Zian, they can listen, is that the day that the President assents to this bill, that there's an actual celebration awareness at State House of all the cultures in this country alongside that signing of that bill, so that everybody in this country is aware that we do have a bill in place that is going to protect our culture. We don't want a situation where when you talk about the bill outside there and everyone asks you, when was that assented? We don't have anything like that. So the awareness, the communication out there has to be extremely powerful so that everyone is really aware of that. And finally, Honorable Speaker, and I like that some of the concerns that we voiced here about Kenya not having a national outfit when we go for national functions or when our athletes represent us out there. At least at the Paris Olympics, we had some sort of a national culture that portrayed the Maasai culture that was worn out there. And it was very exciting that majority of the other participants from other countries actually recognized that Kenya has a beautiful outfit. I wish we could even adopt that as our national dress for our party. So, I mean, sorry, not for our party, for our country, so that anytime we have representation out there of people going to represent the country, they can wear our national outfit. Having said that, Honorable Speaker, I do support the bill and I submit. I thank you.
Thank you very much. The Honorable Ferdinand Wanyonyi, member for Kwanza.
At long last. Madam Speaker, I want to take this opportunity, first of all, to thank all the members that you have contributed on this bill. And I think we have actually exhausted the bill. And as the previous speaker just mentioned, the third reading on this bill, let's take action. When the President assents to this bill, Madam Speaker, I want us to move forward because there are so many things that have gone wrong. I'm a little older than some of the members here, and I can tell you things have gone out. The next 50 years or even 20 years to come, Kenya will not be Kenya that you and I would have admired to be, because, Madam Speaker, things are going haywire. I come from a culture in Luhyaland, And we had a very good culture. For example, the circumcision of the lawyer. We had a special way of going for that particular circumcision. Today, it's a laughing stock. And somebody mentioned, and I think I want to quite agree with whoever mentioned, for us, those days, and I saw those from my own older brothers and other neighbors, what have you, for you to go for circumcision, you went naked. From the river, you go to the river, and from there you are taken almost 2-3 kilometers to your home, and you are operated there openly. Today, Madam Speaker, nothing like that is happening. Things have gone off. Then, of course, those days, and in fact, even as recent as maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, when a child gets married, a boy cannot go and greet the mother-in-law. It's out of respect, not anything else. Today, he can go and hug the mother-in-law, which is actually wrong. In our culture, it's not supposed to be like that. Madam Speaker, we have a problem. This country must be protected. I have a specific case, for example. We had Bomas of Kenya. If those of you have not gone there, in fact, you go there now, it's no longer the Bomas of Kenya we used to know, because it was an area for cultural preservation. Bomas of Kenya is no more. You go to Bomas of Kenya, you will have the Maasai's culture, the Kikuyu's culture, Luyas, what have Luos, and you see that culture was very, very impressive. You're there, you pay the money, and you are there for some time, and of course you come back and say, okay, is this how this community behave? That again is gone. Go to Bomas of Kenya, it's not the same thing. It's now just a business area, doing other things. So we should actually, because I was asking my colleague here, we have a ministry for culture and sports. That ministry must be revived. That ministry must be given guidelines to be able to preserve some of those cultures that actually are very, very important for us to be able to maintain. Because I know for sure that the colonialists came, and when they came, people now want to behave like a Mzungu. But look, that again is now something under the bridge. We just have to behave our own way. We have to revive. For example, in Luya culture, if a child goes to get married, he has to pay almost 13 cows. Today, there's nothing like that. There's nothing like that. It's a culture that actually a Luya boy marrying another person from another area, you pay the money before anything else, even before the wedding. Today, it's no longer there. It's just to understand each other. Like my brother who was okay, I don't want to mention that. But that again, Madam Speaker, we should do something about it. This bill, when it comes to third reading, as members of this parliament, to be able to have very good intervention, the closer you can be able to correct some of the areas that you feel you should be able to correct, because it's just for the interest of this country. Not because of our personal interest, but the interest of this country, that we actually maintain our culture, and so that we are distinct from other people. Because you go out here in the world, you see people behave very differently. And so I want to say that, Mr. Speaker, as you take over, as you take over the seat, I want you to also take note of this, and I think let's have a house full in the third reading of this bill, and let's look at areas where we can be able to put some inputs and be able to see if the culture of this country can be improved through a specific ministry. And don't just put that Ministry of Culture and Social Services and Sports or whatever it is, should be able to take up some of the roles that we are talking about and be able to see what it can do. And last year, not least, I think the county government and the central government of this country should work in collaboration to be able to maintain some of those cultural areas. There's some areas which actually, some of them are still there, they are neglected, but it should be revived, so that through the county government, those cultural centers be revived for the benefit of our future, so that we have a good historical background, So what will be our grandchildren write about Kenya? It will be nothing. So we want that cultural centers to be revived, be protected through the Ministry of Culture and Social Services, and should be also be replicated in the county government. Should have the similar ministry or department in the culture in the county government to be able to maintain these areas, because it's important, Mr. Speaker, that we keep these people as soon as it is. And of course, then we'll have like this bill is actually saying, of course, anybody now, once we are through with that, anybody destroying any of these cultures, whatever, should be actually be punished in terms of paying fine. And that fine should be going, of course, as you know, if you are going to Bomas of Kenya, you pay a lot of money. And there was a Minister of Culture who was getting that as an income. Similarly, anybody interfering with any of these cultural centers should be, and of course the behavior, whatever it is, should be fined. And those things are being fined through Azimio Mp, or the communities can be able to come up with whatever. So that again is something that we have to revive for the benefit of our country. I want to take this opportunity to thank the leader of the majority to have come up with this particular bill, and I think it's very timely, and I hope and pray that we'll support it to the last thing and be able to have it implemented immediately. His Excellency puts a concert on the same. I want to thank you and I support this bill.
The Honorable John Waweru.
Mr. Speaker, I must thank you. I must thank you profusely for giving me this opportunity. And secondly, I have to say that this is a very laudable effort by the Committee on Sports, Youth and Culture under the leadership of the Honorable Wanyama. Mr. Speaker, we are discussing about culture. And in this context, Mr. Speaker, we are actually going into the heart of a discussion for the fight of the soul of a people. Mr. Speaker, it has been said before that if you want to disenfranchise an individual, what you do is you deny them their mother tongue and you take their father's name. Because if you deny someone their mother tongue, everything that is housed in language, whether you call it belief, whether you call them their truth or their identity, it is housed in the language that they speak. In their father's name, an individual finds their identity. And to that extent, Mr. Speaker, then, the Swahili are very right when they tell us that mwachamila ni mtumwa. Mr. Speaker, this vessel that we are calling culture is the one, as I have said, that carries a people's identity, their history, their belief, and even their truth. From the culture I come from, Mr. Speaker, when you refer to your mother, you call her Maito. Maito, if you extrapolate the name, is two words. There is the word Ma and Ito. Ma means the truth. Ito means ours. So the name mother, in essence, means our truth. And that is why you find that in this patriarchal society, the Kikuyu culture is unable to thrive, because by its very formation, the Kikuyu culture was not supposed to be a patriarchal culture. In fact, we all believe that we came from Mombi, the creator. And Mombi is the only name that humanity shares with God. It is the only word in our dictionary, as the Kikuyu speaking people, that a man shares a word, a name with God. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, sorry, Honorable Speaker, I have to say that the tragedy that we seek to remedy by having a bill that gives a framework for the protection of our culture has to do with us finding our way back. What in Gikoyo they would call Woshokiaroe Mokaro, making sure that the river gets back to its course. Because as we speak today, we have been knocked off our what you would call our track of organic cultural development and civilization. And how it happened was very systematic, Mr. Speaker. The moment an individual showed up in our country carrying three very dangerous things, they were carrying on one hand a Bible, a gun, and education and what you would call government. And with that, they were able to rub off our cultures to the extent that today, Mr. Speaker, any individual who professes the Christian faith can give you the lineage of one Jesus Christ of Nazareth, all the way back to his lineage to the house of David, all the way back to the house of Abraham and his son Isaac, and all the way back to the creation story, Adam. And they can give you a chronology of who gave birth to who gave birth to who, and these are tens of generations. However, Mr. Speaker, even I myself would struggle to give my lineage beyond 7 generations. I might profess that I am Kiarie. Kiarie wa Wawero. Wawero wa Ng'ethe. Ng'ethe wa Geshi. Geshi wa Kang'ora. And then beyond that, Mr. Speaker, 7 generations down, then I get lost, Mr. Speaker. As such, Mr. Speaker, then, whatever it is that was housed in the language that I speak, it faces a great danger today. I might be the last of our people who will be able to speak the language that my father spoke and my mother spoke. To that extent, then, Mr. Speaker, the discussion this afternoon becomes extremely important when we juxtapose it with where the world is today. When we talk about the world today, 2 great things are affecting culture. 1, globalization. 2, technology. And they are working hand in hand, Mr. Speaker. That today as we speak, there are large language models that are being developed using data that is scraped off the internet to form what you would call emerging technologies in artificial intelligence. But let us look at them, Mr. Speaker. The language models that we are speaking about today in the world of artificial intelligence and emerging technologies, of the data that they are scraping out of the internet, we are told that 46.5% of that data is in one language, English. German follows closely, Russian follows after, but then, at what point then will my Gikuyu language or my Kamba language from my lineage be onboarded onto this new development in what we are calling the 4th Industrial Revolution? As such, Mr. Speaker, what has been happening then is a lot of cultural appropriation. We know that in this country, there are artifacts that throughout history have been plucked out of our country and are in exhibition and being monetized in capitals abroad, in museums abroad, Mr. Speaker. The man-eating lions of Tsavo, 2 of them, male lions that did not have a mane, a spectacle to behold. When they were shot by a man called Peterson, they were then taken to some museums in Western capitals where they are to date. We are told by historians that one Koitalel Arap Samoei was decapitated, and his head and maybe the skull at that point was taken to museums abroad. Those museums do have entry fee. There are researchers who make big researches out of the data that is in those museums. However, is the Tsavo community benefiting from this appropriation of this culture? Are the Kipsigis benefiting from their leader being exhibited in a museum for now close to a century and some more years? So that, Mr. Speaker, then, the need for a comprehensive legislative framework that enables us to support the integration of culture, the cultural properties in this country, and cultural heritage becomes a priority, Mr. Speaker. Now, here is the critique, Mr. Speaker, that even as we are speaking to this bill as is, it is one devoid of specificities, Mr. Speaker. That in the format that it is and the style that it is big on cultural artifacts. However, culture is larger than artifacts. There are many elements of culture that are not covered in this bill as it exists. So much so that the option we have as a House is to either pass it as it is and then seek for places to amend later, or we might decide then, and in the third reading, Mr. Speaker, we might find a place in the clauses that exist or introduce new clauses where we are able to cover a wider definition of culture rather than zero in on just cultural artifacts. But now the bill has presented, Mr. Speaker, because it is big on cultural artifacts, then we can talk about issues to do with intellectual property. Mr. Speaker, whatever is covered here on intellectual property is a bit shallow. And my question was whether that shall be covered in subsequent or subsidiary legislation, maybe in regulation, or whether there shall be another bill that comes to take care of intellectual property. But finally, Mr. Speaker, I have to say that the essence is urgent. One, for the preservation of our culture and the protection of our culture. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, and most importantly, this House is the House that ratifies international treaties, international conventions. And so, Mr. Speaker, the treaties that we have ratified, some by UNESCO and many others to do with culture, have been given life and effect by us processing a bill that takes care of culture. The Constitution, Mr. Speaker, in Article 11, also is given effect by us passing this bill. And it is for that reason, Mr. Speaker, that I stand to support and seek to amend in the third reading. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on this bill.
The Honorable Christine Ombaka.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to what is very, very important in our lives. We are talking about a bill that deals with culture. And definition of culture. What is culture? It's a way of life as lived by a people at a particular time in history. It means that culture is our way of life. It's the language we speak, it's the song we sing, it's the food, the dress that we have, the food we eat, the sports, everything about our lives is culture. But it is as lived by a people at a particular time in history. It means that culture evolves. It is dynamic. It changes from time to time. The people of the past had their own culture. It moved on and changed on, and we acquired others, and we dropped other ways of culture, other ways of survival, and we moved on and acquired others. Just like language dies. When a language dies, then that culture is finished. That culture, the people of that language will not exist because the language has died. It is important to realize that culture is our identity. If it dies, we are dead. It is cardinal. It is in our lives. It is part and parcel of us. It is our gene that if it is not there, we are not human beings. Unfortunately, our culture, African culture, Kenyan culture, all the tribes that we have, 42 or 43 that we have, these are cultures that are very, very important. But they have been interfered with in the past through colonialism. And it is still being interfered with. It is still changing. It is still not the same as a long time ago. But we need to preserve them because we are preserving our identity. We will be laughed at if we do not preserve it. If I lose my Luo language, where will I belong? What will people think of me? But our children are losing it, and we are not caring. We do not give a hoot about the language that our children are speaking today. They are mixing up English and Swahili and a bit of their local language. Sometimes they speak pure American English, and they cannot utter a word, even the word thank you, even the